Do you want to know how to process prophetic revelations so that you can take it from the place that it's simply just information that the Lord's given you, and then be able to translate it into practical steps that you can see it outwork in your life? In these videos, that's what I'm going to be talking about, and I'm going to be interviewing apostolic builders from across the UK and the world, and they're going to give us insights on how to take prophetic revelation and download it. Hi, I'm Simon Breaker, co-founder of Legacy Ministries International. Really fantastic that you're here. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and do leave comments at the bottom. I do pray that today that you're blessed in a mighty way and that what you hear has a fruitful impact in your lives. Amen. Stay tuned. This is going to be fantastic. Hi Facebook family. So I am live with Jarrod. Unfortunately this morning, for some peculiar reason, Facebook did not want to play ball and would not let us broadcast. So this is being recorded. So we're alive and you're alive and we'll collide in the middle. So Jarrod, it's fantastic to be with you. How are you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm good. I think maybe what we've got to say is so important, Facebook don't want it to go out.
Let's just say that. That'll do. That'll do.
Yeah.
So I know you've been doing some stuff this week, haven't you, with the with your prophetic program? Do you want to share about that for a minute?
Yeah.
Just
well,
about that, and we'll bounce off that.
Yeah. When the lockdown started, we began a kind of nightly TV thing on YouTube and Facebook, just teaching and that. But as time went on, I just really felt we needed to do something where in an undiluted form, we could hear the prophetic message of what God was saying. Because I knew from all of my contacts in the States, around the UK, Australia, South Africa, that the prophets were really speaking with great alignment globally about what was happening now, what God was going to do out of this situation, and then kind of life after lockdown, where we were trying to head. So, I mean, you'll know, the start of 2020, end of 2019, there was real talk of this is a new era, not just a new season. Something major is taken off right at this time. And so we thought, well, okay, there was a tremendous alignment then being prophesied. And I thought, well, let's pull this together. So I've interviewed people, picked up major prophetic words that have been released by people, and then we've put it together, and thousands have watched it so far in the first few days. I think we're 3 days in. So yeah, really exciting.
Cool. And where can people find that, just so that they know?
So if they head to my YouTube channel, if they look up Jarrod L. Cooper on YouTube, and you'll find it there. It's all available on demand and stuff like that now.
Oh, cool. And what's God been saying to you?
He's been telling me to get rid of that little screen behind because it was doing something naughty. It was distracting me. Sorry, it's my OCD taking over. I understand. I spent 5 minutes yesterday when I was talking to Daniel Herman, because of the fact I realised that the lion picture behind me, because what I got the laptop rested on, it was just not straight. So the top of the picture was just not quite right. And I'm talking to Daniel and I'm going, that's really getting on my nerves, that is. Yeah, I can't think of anything. Prophetic OCD, we all have it. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, look, I mean, as soon as lockdown happened, I began to pray. As soon as it was announced, I began to pray, literally in the few minutes after it was announced. And I had a vision immediately, vividly, of the throne of God over a flood. And of course, God is enthroned on the flood. I knew straight away, hey, that's a scripture. So I had to go find it. But it was Psalm 29. And it speaks of God being enthroned over trouble and difficulty, and the voice of God powerfully affecting things in the world. And then I've got it here, the Passion Translation, which I love for the little notes at the bottom. I don't know about you. I love all the study stuff that comes with it. And it says this in the description of it: sitting as king, God rules even over the dark flood of evil to make it end.
Wow, what a statement.
He rules over the dark flood of evil to make it end. And that's what I felt immediately. And of course, the beautiful thing that I see as I walk around the village where I live is all these rainbows in the windows that all the children have done. And I'm like, yeah, God, you are ruling over this flood. And I really feel, of course, there's no need to fear. There's no need to be troubled. Yes, we're going to grieve with those that grieve. And I know that some guys like those working in the NHS and stuff like that are going through a very, very busy and difficult time. But essentially, God is in charge. He is in control, and he will bring this thing to an end. And what the enemy sent for harm, God will turn it around and use it for good. He knew about this before the beginning of time. And as with even our own weaknesses and brokenness, he is so clever. He can.
Oh, he's a genius. Yeah.
He weaves all of the mess of humanity together to come out with something incredible. And you kind of want to go, how on earth did you make that out of that? But that's who God is. He rules over chaos, and he turns it into order. And that's what he'll do in this time. Yeah.
It's interesting what you're saying there, because I haven't got the specific text in my memory right now, but there's a verse in Isaiah that I was reading. And I think it was the ISV translation that put it this way: the day of trouble is mine.
Wow.
The Lord just says, the day of trouble is mine. And it's just that it says the day of the trouble is the Lord's. That's the exact words. And just that sense of, it's not, God's just not Lord of the good days. He's Lord of every day. And then it goes through, and it comes to this point where it says he shuts down the meeting at the wall. And then it speaks about the establishing of the mountain. And I looked in the Hebrew, and actually what it's saying, it says he brings it to a place of birthing, that the mountain speaks about birthing. And just this sense of the Lord saying, in the day of trouble, the day of trouble is actually a day of birthing. And we were, even before we started this recording, didn't we? We were talking about, I mean, there is so much innovation. I mean, even in my own life, I can testify to that I've become more tech savvy in the last 3 weeks than I have in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And it's like the Lord is delivering his church out of a model of church that was very effective in the day of Wesley. But maybe, there's no maybes, is that there's a lot of room for innovation in this day, isn't there? I mean, have you had any thoughts around that?
I've been saying for about a year, I guess, innovate. There's several words that have been really powerful to me. Words like collaboration. And I think you'll find prophets around the world who've been talking about a new level of collaboration, not just unity. We're not just talking about unity events, but there's a new collaboration coming to the church where we work together and we don't even care who gets the praise or the results. We're a team. And so something's happening with that. One of the other words, there's probably 6 or 7, but one of the others was innovation. And I've been feeling and sensing a new spirit of innovation coming upon the church, because there is a release of a higher level, I think, of the mandate to reach the 7 mountains, to impact society, and to bring transformation. So I've been saying for ages, innovation, because that's what I feel God has been saying. But now it's almost, we spoke about this when I interviewed you on Tribe TV the other night. God can say it, but I feel like he's enforcing it now, which is very different. Yeah. And I spoke, when we spoke before, about the communication technique called the burning platform.
That's right, yeah.
And the idea is like this. If I'm stood on an oil rig and there's a guy stood next to me and I say, jump into the sea, well, there's going to be an argument. He's going to go, why? You crazy. There's going to be a big conversation before he'll do anything that I ask. But then the communication technique says, well, set fire to the platform and then tell him to jump into the sea. Suddenly there's no argument. It becomes the obvious thing to do. It's a communication technique where it cuts down the amount of argument and resistance, and all the late adopters and the slow adopters suddenly catch up. And that's what God's doing right now. He's making us suddenly catch up with this new world where communication is very, very different. It flies through the air. It's on demand. We're connected in ways we never were before. There is a harvest field waiting on the mountain of the online world.
Yeah.
And of course, we can all reach it for peanuts, which is incredible. So there's a harvest waiting in the online world, especially think of our British society, where we do still live in our little castles, right? We We're not living. I grew up in the Mediterranean where multiple generations live under one roof. But the reality is today that in Britain, we still live, kind of nuclear families in our homes. But media, and especially now the internet, can reach right into a home and bring transformation. So I believe God set fire to the platform of the old way of doing church. And he's saying, right, it's not that we're never going to gather again or pray again or use some of the tools we used before, like Alpha and all these other wonderful things. But definitely God is forcing us to innovate. So I would say to leaders out there, don't hunker down and wait for it to be over. Use this moment to learn and stretch your own heart and go, okay, let's find different ways of doing things, because actually there's power in the learning curve of it all. Yeah. And so I think he's enforcing innovation on us. And in fact, something I saw just the other day, I began to see things like the Eiffel Tower and great ironwork structures. And I was thinking and praying at the time about, like the Industrial Revolution and stuff like that. There came a time when new methods and new materials led to a whole new wave of doing things, because there was a new availability of certain methods and materials.
There it is.
It was a new normal. So now God has picked us up, and there is a revolution going on in the church with new methods and new materials that are going to lead to a whole revolution of how we behave and how we do church. And so it's never going to be the same again, because of the percentage of us that are learning to use new tools. And to go online would be the most obvious one, but there's heaps of other smaller ways that we're learning to connect and to integrate right now. And so it's a revolution taking place.
It's interesting. I was reminded of this while you were talking, but when Joe and I were living up in Teesside, I love fishing. So there's a river up there called the River Swale, and it's only a small river. And I'm doing everything that you do when you're fishing. I knew I'd got everything right, and nothing's happening. I wasn't getting any fish, and I just thought, I'm gonna climb that tree and have a look. And it's a chalk stream, so you can see to the bottom of the river. You know what's there. So I climb up this tree and I look, and the area where I was fishing, there wasn't a fish for miles, because the river's only really, really shallow. And I was doing all the right stuff. I got the right bait. I got the right rods. I knew what I was doing, but I was fishing in the wrong place. And I had to pick up all the gear, and I moved about a mile up the river, found some fish, and then started catching. And I think one of the challenges that we've got right now is I hear people say, we're not connecting. There's a generation we're not reaching, and we're not connecting to them. And then I'll go out with my daughter, and she'll be there with her friends, and they'll be sitting there, they'll be communicating with each other. And how are they doing it? They're doing it like this. And I remember saying to her one day, I said, do you not want to talk? I am talking to my friends. And they are talking to each other face to face, but they're also, whilst they're with each other in the same room, they're also in the internet world as well, in the virtual world as well. And I think one of the challenges that the church has got is we're trying to reach people in a place that they're not. And we've got to go to them. You can wait, and eventually they might wander up the river and you'll find them eventually. But I think I've heard a couple of pastors have said to me, I don't touch social media. I'm not getting into all of that. And I think, well, you're a fool. That to me is foolishness, because we're called to pastor people, prophets, whoever. We're called to lead and pastor people. And if you're going to lead and pastor people, you've got to lead them where they are.
Yeah, and you've got to go into that world.
You have got to go into that world, and you've got to have an effective voice. And I've been watching some other stuff. Well, I don't know how comfortable I am about the amount of Christian stuff there is appearing online. And I nearly responded and said, but you are happy with all of the non-Christian stuff that there is online. So do you know what I mean? It's like it's that old thing, isn't it? The champions of the old can become the critics of the new. And we've all got to try and innovate and keep our hearts supple, haven't we, to make sure that we don't get so married to our way of doing things that we're not willing to embrace the innovation and the new things that God's bringing, isn't it? It's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah, the idolatry of method is what kept Moses out of the promised land.
Wow, what a statement.
So You know the story. We all know it. God said, strike the rock. The first time he struck the rock. Then the second time he changed the method. He said, speak to the rock. Moses struck the rock, used the old method instead of living out of intimacy, which is, I know, some of the stuff you've been talking about. And the idolatry of method kept him from the promised land.
Wow.
In other words, if we fall in love with how we do things instead of why and for whom we do things, we're in idolatry. And I do believe God's dealing with idolatry in the church right now, in all of us, in me, my own personal hankerings for how I like things to be. And we lose that sense of adventure, trying new things, experimenting, exploring. Even some people, they think they're backslidden. They're not. They are just psychologically bored.
Isn't that the truth?
I'm serious. The psychology of it is this, that we all need to do new things because it literally rewires our brain in fresh ways. So many people, they live for 20 years, but they don't have 20 years experience. They have 1 year's experience 20 times.
Wow.
They keep doing the same thing over and over again. And then they wonder why their heart is no longer excited. They then feel, well, I must be backslidden because I feel bored and I don't feel quite so passionate as I did. And it's not that they're backslidden. They've just become boring. What they need to do is just do something new spiritually. You've never prophesied before? Give it a whirl. You've never read certain parts of the Bible? Go for it. You've never listened to audio Bible instead of reading it? Whatever it is, you are biologically wired to need to do new things in order to feel fresh psychologically and then spiritually. So many people that are backslidden, they feel they are. They're not. They are psychologically and biologically bored.
And it's
he's enforcing the new.
And it's reflected. I mean, I go to the gym. I've got a personal trainer down the gym, and he I'll do a program for 4 weeks, and then we reconfigure the program after 4 weeks, because physically your body adapts to the program and it ceases to have the impact. And then you've got stuff like training, stuff like HIIT, which is high intensity interval training, where you shock your body. You go fast, then you stop, and then you go fast, then you stop. And they've shown that doing that for 1 minute actually has more effect on your physical fitness than doing 45 minutes of monotonous that. And I mean, there is so much stuff that God has actually built into the physical biology of human beings. And yet we get exactly that. We get stuck in that, and we run the same program. And I'm reminded of a heartbreaking story, really, when I think about this. We went through a building restoration many years ago when we were running the church. And what happened was I'd been renting an office in an old United Reformed church. And to get to it, I had to walk through what was effectively a derelict school hall. And we negotiated with the church there and said, will you let us restore this and use this for our meetings? And they said yes. So we went through the process, got it all restored. It hadn't been used for years, I mean decades. It had just been laying derelict. And it was all refurbished. We got it all redone. And bless him, the one of the elders of the church, he came in and he stood there and he looked and he said, this looks so fantastic. And he started to cry. And I said, what are you crying for? He says, I don't understand it. I says, what's that? He says, we used to have queues of people waiting to get into the building. And he says, we're doing exactly the same thing now that we were doing 20 years ago. Everything's the same. And yet the people don't come anymore. And I listened to him and I thought, in his heart, what he was saying is we're being faithful, but what it said was we've got stuck and we've not moved with the time. And I remember one of my first experiences of prophecy. Actually, it's in the church I'm in now. It was 20 years ago, and the then vicar, he opened the platform. He wanted to get some prophecy moving. And it was the evening service. There was somebody from Nottingham who came to help this all happen. It was probably more like 30 years ago. And this dear lady, if the evening service, like most Anglican churches at that time, was more free, more charismatic. So the morning was with the organ, the evening was with the full team that we'd all be familiar with. And they opened the platform for prophetic words. And this dear lady, she comes up, takes the microphone, and she says, "I, the Lord, love the organ, but I don't like the drums and the electric guitar, says God." And then she goes back and sits down. It's like, I've never forgotten that. But that's it, isn't it? We can be so stuck. We've got to get unstuck.
I mean, you know, take worship, for example. I think, is it Mark 6 or 7, somewhere around there? Jesus himself, so it's written in red, you've got to accept it, right? Says this shocking phrase. He says, "They worship me in vain."
Wow. Yeah.
So you can even be worshiping Jesus in your song. He can be the focus, but it can be in vain. And it goes on to say that it's because your way of worship is just rules taught by men. And so
Wow.
you've disempowered yourself from the true gospel. So even if you use my name, it doesn't mean you're a Christian. In the sense of, it doesn't mean you're living in the fullness of it. Just because the song's about Jesus doesn't make it vibrantly filled with the power and the glory of the gospel.
Wow.
It has to be intimate with God. It has to come from the breath of God. Man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. There is a word proceeding from the mouth of God for you and I right now that is sustaining us. Yeah. When I ride on that word, I'm alive. Yeah, when I make a religion out of that word, so it's the same word from 20 years ago, and I just keep repeating it because I enjoyed it 20 years ago, I've fallen in love with the word instead of being in love with God. And so we lose it. And I turned 50 2 days ago. Wow. Can you believe it? So here's a danger. Again, let's look at biology and psychology for a moment. As you get older, you start to use a different part of your brain. Early in our lives, we live from imagination. My son is 11. He thinks he can be anything. He's going to be a chef, a musician, an Olympic athlete, and you name it, NASA astronaut, all before he's 21 years old.
Yeah.
It's imagination, and then you run towards it. But as you get older, there's a shift in your brain. You move from the creative, imaginative part of your brain over to memory. And here's our great danger. We start to live out of memory instead of imagination as we get older. So as a 50-year-old church leader that's been in ministry 30 years, my greatest danger is as soon as I face a problem, I go to my memory banks instead of to the Spirit of God or my prophetic imagination.
That's a good word, Jarrod. Well done. Yeah.
So I open up the filing cabinet and I go, I've done this before. Need to see more people saved? Right, let's go through it. Alpha. Okay, and I've got all my little list of food bank. And how's that? I've got all my ways of running services, doing things, and they're all now at 30 years in ministry in my memory banks. And so I get to the idolatry of memory as well as method. Wow, it's turning into a preach this, right? Never thought of that. It's the idolatry of memory. In other words, I didn't need to ask God. I just go back to my memory banks and ask my memory banks. And that, again, is what causes us to live this Christianity that is in vain. It's a waste of time. You might as well have played golf on Sundays instead of doing that.
Yeah.
We need to stay in the fresh place of God speaking, because that's where the life is.
Yeah. I mean, it fascinates me. Something that you heard, but I think I spoke about it when we interviewed this thing at the beginning of last year, actually January last year. I was in Pasadena and I was speaking at a prophetic conference over there, and the Lord said to me, he says, "I want you to speak about killing the spirit of franchise." And I think one of the things that I've watched in leadership, in church leadership, and I've not been in church leadership that long compared to many, some have been around before Moses. But you have this dynamic that you get around long enough to begin to see the patterns. And I want to prefix, first of all, I absolutely believe going to places of breakthrough definitely produces an impartation. I definitely do. Yeah. I've seen it happen in my life, and I've had ministries that have had breakthrough where they are, and they've come to us and they've deposited something. But this is where it goes off. There was a church I was working with at the time of Pensacola, and the prayer meetings there, because they had so many people, they organized it that they could organize the massive crowd of people by having flags. So there was a revival flag, there was a government flag, there was a healing flag. And then what they did is they said, look, we're not going to lead you in prayer in the sense of telling you what to pray. We want you to listen to the Holy Spirit, and you just go to the prayer point that you're currently carrying a burden for. So there was like 1,000 people in the room, and it was so dynamic that people were just moving from place to place. It was so fantastic. So we could get back, and I visit a church when I get back. The church has got 7 people in their prayer meeting, and they've got 12 flags in the room. And it's like, because of course it was the flags that produced the move of the Spirit. And then you got another dynamic where you go to another context, and their part of their culture is they've started soaking and spending time in the presence of God. That's great as well. But it wasn't the soaking that produced the move of the Holy Spirit. It was obedience to God that produced it. So now suddenly you turn up, everybody's coming to the prayer meeting with pillows and sleeping bags. And if we lay on the floor, then God, and it's just that, exactly what you say, idolatry of method. And I'm sitting in leaders' meeting and say, so then we get to a particular thing that I won't name, but it involved 12. And they said each person, they need to make 12 disciples, and those 12 disciples make 12 disciples. And I remember sitting in the room, and I was quite new in all of this, and I said, can I ask, the thing that this thing didn't produce it, that thing didn't produce it, can I ask why this particular method's going to produce it? And one of the leaders in the room said, you'll see in 12 months. And his church disbanded in the next 12 months, because he tried to take something that had been birthed in another context and try to, if you like, emboss it, force it upon that context. And I've seen so often that we can be tempted to try and import somebody else's model, somebody else's revelation. I reckon that's why David put the ark on the cart, that he saw what the Philistines were doing and thought, oh, maybe that's the way I should do it. And we know what happened there. And it is exactly that, isn't it? It's that dynamic. And even in worship, I hear, when I joined the Anglican Church, one of the guys said to me, you know him actually, he said, it's just a denomination, they have their, he says, it's all structured, there's no room for the Holy Spirit. And the thing of it is when I was with them, I could tell you exactly when we were going to sing in tongues, because it was always the same time. So although it wasn't written down, it was just as structured. And I think we've got to somehow find fresh life, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, when the story of Ichabod's birth, Ichabod, of course, means the glory is departed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the story of the ark and being taken by the Philistines. And this is the thing. Israel was fighting the Philistines, but they'd lost God. And this was the language in one of the translations. It says that they said, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant that it may save us from our enemies.
Yeah.
Because the Ark had always been around in moves of God, they began to equate the Ark almost as powerful as God. In other words, the method that God once gave is as powerful as God himself. But
wow,
no, it is. So the glory departs the moment we treat the method as equal to God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what happens is we get lots of people that think certain things are holy or unholy. And they're not at all. They're just things. You know, how long you sing for. Yes, when you're singing in the Spirit happens, or if it never happens. The times of your meetings, how we dress, how we converse, how we speak. None of these things are holy or unholy. They're just things. And so it is getting back to that stream of God. What are you saying right now? What do you want to do? I want to hear you. I want to see what you're doing, and I want to do it. And here's the other thing that confuses us is God moves on real quick. So, man, this is turning into another preach. I've got another one, the idolatry of moment.
That's really good.
We turn a moment. It's like, you know, Peter, James, and John up the mountain in Luke 9 with Jesus. Let's stay here, build tabernacles. You know,
franchise it. Yep.
Franchise it. We're the glory movement now. We're the glory boys. And of course, that is what happened, because of course they got down the mountain. They've had about 3 minutes with Elijah, and they start trying to call down fire on the Samaritans. In other words, being in the glory doesn't stop you being a plonker.
There's a tweet right there.
That's right. It's like we think, well, I've met God, therefore everything about me is now theologically and it's sound. And it's like, no, you can still be an idiot. You can perform a miracle 1 minute and be a complete idiot the next.
Yep.
But Jesus keeps moving on. I mean, can you believe it? 3 years, 3.5 years of ministry, and then he's shifting to his next phase. The amount that he accomplished in 3.5 years. And then he said to those youngsters that we wouldn't trust today, essentially, okay, we're 3.5 years in. We've had a wonderful revival. I'm resurrected, but I'm off now. I'm retiring, and I'm going to empower you from a distance. Like, no. We need to build stability. Give us another 20, 30 years of input. We are still thick. We still don't know what to do. And they were thick, because he was saying, go into all the world. And then the moment that Pentecostal fire fell, in the book of Acts, they sat there having a Jewish revival for ages until God scattered them through persecution all over those straight Roman roads and turned the world upside down. But they were so thick, they didn't even realize this fire that's come was supposed to go with it.
Yeah.
So God is so risky. He is such an early adopter. He moves so quickly that we struggle to keep up. And so he has not just pressed the reset button, he's smashed it. He set fire to the burning platform of our memories and our moments and our methods. And he said, right, now will you come alone, listen to me, and cause you to innovate for this new season? I believe we're coming into one of the greatest seasons the church has ever had. And it's not in spite of the dark and difficult. It's actually God's going to use it. It'll be because of the dark and difficult that we're forced to go find him again and find ways to walk with him. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, this has been absolutely, I think I've been more blessed than anybody else. I'm inclined to keep this video to myself.
Fine by me, mate.
It's funny. Obviously, I don't know whether you've met Sean Foyt. He's a worship leader from the United States. He's a great guy. And he made this statement to me. He said, in worship, sometimes what people call the presence of God is not the presence of God at all. It's the nostalgia of where God has been. And when they go into a place of worship, what they're actually doing is they're having a nostalgic moment of an encounter they had 20 years ago, but there's nothing fresh about the moment that they're in now. And obviously there's some value in remembering what God's done. That goes without saying. But I do think we do need to be careful of not worshiping the old. I mean, I've even had a comment, we need a lamb, but I had somebody comment say, we need to honor the old. And of course, the way that God honored Moses was by telling Joshua, Moses is dead.
Has a bluntness to him sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's like it's not that we're not honoring it. It's just that we're recognizing that you can't, you're not going to get where you need to go using the old model. You got to use the new model.
Yeah, I think the Bible's real clear that we've got to stay humble about the transient nature of our moment.
Yeah.
One day, people will be going, wow, that stuff that they innovated in 2020, that's now so old-fashioned and so behind the times. So I think it's staying humble, walking humbly with God, doing what he calls you to do in the moment, and realizing, listen, we've got to take all of this incredibly seriously, but ourselves not very seriously at all.
There you go.
You know what I mean? Because sometimes I'm getting very het up about stuff, and then I pause and I talk to my eternal God who has already lived every day I'll ever live, and yet he still surrounds all of time with the wonder of his glory and his power. Yeah. And I kind of get the sense from heaven, Jarrod, in about 5 million years' time, you'll be kind of slightly less impressed with yourself than you are today. You won't think this problem as big as you thought it was. Listen, because here's my thing. I always want to be further on than I am. Yeah. Listen, the best way a human can put it is we've got millions of years to go in learning and walking with our God. Let's stay
Amen.
humble and enjoy the journey. We're not there
Amen.
yet. The microwave
Amen.
hasn't pinged, even though your emails are pinging.
They're not even emails. They're my daughter telling me, "You're not live, you know. You're not live."
Hey, mate, it's been great to be with you.
Yeah, praise God. Really, really good. Bless you, buddy.
All right,
so,
mate.
We'll land there, and bless you all. And I hope you've been encouraged by this.
See you, everybody. Bless you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.